Hello everyone! Welcome to another video. And this one is the start of a 3-part series on how I'm redesigning my VTuber model, which I'm hoping can help all of you with the creation of models in the future as well. The model I'm using right now was made back in the summer of 2022, and I feel like all of my artistic skills have advanced way more since back then. Since I plan to be making a lot more videos, I'd much rather have a model that reflects my current abilities. So along with that, I am also taking the chance to try and use my knowledge to help a lot more people learn about the skills needed to make a VTuber. This first video in the series will be all about character design. We are going to discuss all of the important character design rules you need to know and how you can use them, as well as important guidelines that are specific to designing VTuber models. And after that, we are going to be putting everything in action, as I will be showing you all of the process of how I made my full character design from start to end. This video is meant to be accessible to both artists and to VTubers, so I'll be trying to make everything very clear and easy to understand for non-artists as well. I will also have a Google Docs document down in the description with various other resources that have helped me, so you can have more things to look into. But without further ado, let's start by learning about some character design fundamentals. So, if you've tried researching character design already at all, it is very much possible that you might have heard about certain rules that are considered milestones in the field. And one of them is the importance of shape language. So, when it comes to shape language in character design, we are usually referring to 3 different shapes: circles, squares, and triangles. And each of them communicates and carries with it some very specific meanings. The circle, for example, is used in more cute or fun and bouncy designs, if a character is meant to be light-hearted and silly, or shy and soft. The circle is usually the shape to go with. Then we have squares. Squares are sturdy and solid, so they are meant to go for characters that you can depend on, someone reliable and unmoving, and so they are very often used for more heroic or parent-like figures, since those are the ones that people are meant to see as strong and depend on them. So if this is what you aspire for your VTuber character to be like for your viewers, the square is the shape you should be looking into. Triangles, on the other side, are meant to give off a sense of danger or unpredictability. They are actually used for characters that are, well, edgy, and that's exactly because of their edges. While squares also carry edges, triangles lack the sturdiness that the square shows. They look more unbalanced, thus contributing to making the characters look unpredictable as well. This is why triangles are used often in villainous characters, and also in literal danger signs if you think about it. If your VTuber character is more edgy or villainous, scary, or even just kind of thorny, triangles are definitely the way to go. Now, these shapes are very easy to follow when working with things like cartoon characters that differ a lot in size and can take way more surrealistic forms, but they might be a bit more difficult to translate to the more human-like dimensions of an anime character, which is what most people making VTuber models are going to be working with. So, since you can't make your entire character just be all circles, or triangles, or squares, you can do the next best thing. Add the shapes everywhere you can. In the hair shape, in accessories, in the clothing design, and any other element of your VTuber. This doesn't mean that your model has to be comprised of only one specific shape, of course. That would probably be impossible. But try using one of those shapes more than the others, especially since it will really help signal to someone who sees you for the first time what kind of character you have. As an example, I chose the circle as my main shape. So for my model, I used mostly round shapes to match with the more calm and cute image that I want to show to everyone. But I do also like going on more edgy territory sometimes, so I made sure to add quite a few sharp elements on my design as well. Still, the circle is the main one, and that helps keep things more clear and cohesive. Apart from the smaller elements though, you can also use shape language for your silhouette, which is also something that can make you stand out. Many famous VTuber designs actually use this technique, and speaking of silhouettes, the silhouette test is also something you might have heard when it comes to character design. It's an extremely useful and easy tool to help you evaluate your character design in a lot of things, but most of all, its uniqueness. So, to do the silhouette test, you just take your character design and make it all black, so that only the silhouette remains. Easy enough. The easier it is to recognize your character like this, and the easier it is to differentiate between them and other characters, the better. elements like very big hair or a very puffy big dress or coats can actually hinder your ability to be recognizable through the silhouette test. So if you're planning to give your character something like that, make sure to either give it a very different color and value from the main body so that it can act as more of a background and thus make the main body easy to concentrate on for the viewer. Or give the hair or outfit a very unique shape so that it can never be confused for anyone else. Or do what I did, since in my case I have very big hair, and add other elements to the design that are actually even bigger and make you more easily recognizable. Also, I would like to mention here how important asymmetry is. Of course, many parts of your character, as in most of the main body, will probably have to be completely symmetrical, and that's for the better. But a silhouette that will look exactly the same on the right and the left would be boring. So you can add asymmetry at least in a few places. I would say at least one big part, or two medium-sized parts, or three smaller parts should be asymmetrical, and easily seen as that. Parts that I would say are a good idea to change would be the hair or outfit, but try to be creative with it. You will see when I'll be making my own design how much I love asymmetry, but of course, too much asymmetry can lead to chaos, and you definitely want to keep a balance. Speaking of balance, you need to make sure to keep a balance between complexity and simplicity in your design. This is a very difficult line to tread and very easy to get wrong. So the best thing you can do is observe a lot of different very well designed characters and take notes from what they do right, as well as keep checking and rechecking your design. A fresh look on it after a day or two can really make you understand a lot of mistakes that could be happening. A too complex design will make the viewer unable to concentrate to where you want them to concentrate, usually your face. But a very simplistic design will be too boring to look at and won't draw as much attention. So, find the balance. You want to use enough elements that will differentiate your character and make them interesting to look at, but at the same time make them simple enough that you can turn them into a chibi and nothing important will be missing. They will still be easily recognizable. And another thing to pay attention to is to not have too many clashing elements. Contrast between things can be a good thing, but not usually when stylistic. You want to make sure that everything, especially when it comes to shading, stays consistent. And also make sure to not use too many patterns. You can experiment with various things to see what fits, and in the end the final result should be attention-grabbing and recognizable, but not chaotic and overwhelming. And this will often take many different iterations of the design until you reach it. But keep on, I know you got it. And another thing that you need to make sure is balanced and not overly chaotic, though is very important, and that is color. One of my favorite parts of any designing process, and yet possibly the most frustrating one. I love making palettes. I love looking at colors. I think colors are one of the best parts of any design, but they are also possibly the easiest part to mess up. You don't want to use many, and the temptation to use too many is seriously strong. Or at least, it was for me. I can't speak for everyone. But here are some guidelines that can help you. And keep in mind, those aren't strict rules, but it is stuff that it would be best you follow, especially if you're pretty new to design. Since to know how to effectively break those rules, you will first need to understand them well. So first of all, in order to not overdo it with colors, 60-30-10 is the first rule to remember. So what does that mean? The design has to be 60% made out of a central neutral color that will be the main, then 30% of a different color that will complement the main, and then 10% of an accent color. So, your design should hopefully have 3 main colors, or at the very least groups of colors. You might have a design with purple, yellow and white, for example, and you might want to have a few different types of purple. As long as they are not too far from the main purple in terms of hue and value and saturation, it should be fine. But this is a very useful rule that can act as a great crutch as you're beginning to learn design. Now, when thinking about what kind of colors you want your design to have, I would suggest to start either by choosing the main color or the main and complementary color as a combination. For example, I knew I wanted my design to be mainly pink and black. And then you can move on to choosing any other colors you want to add. When you're choosing colors, it would also be best to think about what each color means, since they all bring certain emotions to us. Red is energetic and passionate. Blue is calm and cool, black is mysterious and evil, and the such. So you have to think about who is your character and what color would represent their inner world to the outside in the very best way. Apart from the hue, it is also important to think about the value and saturation of the color you're using. A bright red would mean a character is energetic and fun, or very hot-headed, for example. But if you turn the value way down, it turns into a dark burgundy, and then the character feels way more evil or regal or dark. And if you keep the value the same and change the saturation, then the color becomes a light pink, and the character may feel more light and cutesy. So when talking about color psychology, keep in mind that there are many different types of red, many different types of blues or yellows or greens and purples, and you have to think about all of their aspects to achieve what is best for you. Now, after deciding on one or two colors, you have to think about all the others that will appear in your design. So let's learn some color theory and see some of the classic color combinations we can make. So, first we have a monochromatic color scheme. Easy enough, only one hue, and then you add different values and saturations to it. Best used if you're having a VTuber design that might be meant to be seen as maybe a bit of monotonous or very light, very unsaded. And what comes to mind to me would be a ghost model, for example, but although it lacks contrast, it can give a more clean and polished look. It's very simple as a concept, but you have to work hard to make it interesting. Then we have an analogous color scheme, 3 hues beside each other on the color wheel. A step above monochromatic, and you get the chance to add more colors while still keeping the scheme cohesive and not wire grabbing. Again, if your character is someone who has a very set theme and values, someone very steady and specific in terms of character, analogous structures do not create themes with highly contrasting colors, so they're typically used to create a softer and less contrasting design. This is a very good but can be more lively and varied than monochromatic, which can be very helpful. Then we have perhaps the most talked about color scheme, complementary. You choose the colors that are on complete opposite sides of the color wheel. This causes a very eye-grabbing contrast that can be great for you, and these colors are very easy to make look good together, and it looks very concentrated and just honestly right. After this we have a triadic color scheme, so you get 3 colors that are equally far away from each other on the color wheel. And this has a very similar effect to the complementary color scheme, but it doesn't look as concentrated. If your character is someone who might enjoy more variety, this is a great color scheme for you since it can really help show different sides of you. And last we have the tetradic color scheme, where you might have guessed it, you grab 4 colors that are equally as far away from each other on the color wheel. And this has similar strengths to the triadic, it can pop out a lot and using so many colors can be exciting, but you have to make sure to keep a balance, especially if your character is someone very chaotic and all over the place. So this color scheme could be the key for you. Of course, these are just some guidelines. It doesn't mean that someone energetic can't have a monochromatic palette, or that someone more calm can't have a tetradic palette. And you don't even have to use any of those schemes, but they are just really good way to learn about color theory and can help a lot, especially if you're a beginner. Now, you also have to keep a good balance of value and saturation. So you shouldn't have everything be completely dark or light. You need some variety. And being completely desaturated might make the design boring, while being too saturated will make the viewer's eyes hurt. You have to find a way to strike a balance, which mostly happens by trying out many different values and saturations and seeing what works. I experimented quite a bit with this in my model as well, but also something to keep in mind is that you should keep the high contrast and high saturation elements as close to the focal point, so probably the face in this case, as possible. When a viewer looks at the model, the first thing they should look at should be the focal point, and to do that, what we artists use are high contrast and saturation elements that don't exist as much in the rest of the design. All that being said, apart from personal preference and personality, you might want to look into some more things when starting to design your model. So I think it's really important to think of a theme. I've alluded to this before, but it is important that your VTuber design matches to what your personality is going to be like. Having a dissonance between one and the other isn't necessarily a bad thing, but the moment people see someone's model, they are going to be having certain expectations. And while subverting them can be fun, it also might lead to some people feeling disappointed, or some people not joining a VTuber they might have otherwise enjoyed. So it is important that you think hard about what you want your VTuber to look like, since it's what will represent you to your audience first and foremost. So what I would suggest is make a list of your interests, any ideas you might have on your lore, patterns or colors that you like, and what you are going to be doing on stream. If you need help brainstorming, you can also look at some of your favorite media to see what iconography they might have that you might be able to use. And this can help you get to the final themes of your design down and lead to a VTuber that represents you the best. I also think research is a pretty important step that shouldn't be skipped. I think it is especially important when you're planning to represent specific cultural elements. In these cases, you should really learn as much as possible and try not to go with just what you know through pop culture or even your own experience, since no matter what your theme of choice is, there is probably more you can learn about it somewhere out there. And this kind of searching, whether it is on specific cultural elements or creatures, whether those be real or fictional, can really help extremely much in your brainstorming process and in getting you not only to give your design a deeper meaning, but also think outside the box more, since you might happen upon lots of interesting information. This doesn't necessarily mean you should go extremely deep and spend hours reading on your character's theme though. Perhaps you may want your character to just represent you. So then you should think about what you like. Look around your room and in your PC's folders, see what you can find and brainstorm on how these kinds of things can be represented in your design, which is what I mostly did. Through this process, you can find items, motifs, and various pieces of fashion that could really help bring your character to life. And most importantly, use them to make a mood board. I cannot stress enough how important a mood board can be when creating a character. You can use it in so many ways. You can make sure you forget none of the things you had in mind and to help you try out different things. While a list of words can be helpful, we are working with a visual element here, so a visual element is what is going to help most in reaching the desirable final product. I think for a mood board for a VTuber character, it would be very helpful to have some non-living things in it, like items, landscapes, plants, vague things that can really help keep your imagination going. Then I think it's also a good idea to keep some illustrations that you may really like as well, drawings that really give off a feel similar to what you want to give, and also you can keep there other VTuber models that might inspire you. I'd say it's not a good idea to only get very heavily inspired by one or two of them, but taking smaller parts from lots of different designs can be really helpful. And lastly, I personally really like keeping various clothing ideas in my mood boards. I keep folders filled with designs from many different fashion designs there, from photography to catwalks, and they can really help inspire you. Find what style you want to follow and browse clothing from this type of style in magazines and throughout the internet. Like that, you will be able to find tons of references that can end up helping a ton in making the final design. And that is a part that isn't as talked about, but I consider quite essential, but it's the function of your character. Since clothing design is one of my favorite parts when making any character, I really want to talk about this. This is the part where you can represent so much of what you gathered in your research. Try to use different references from your mood board as I was saying before. Think of either what you're wearing in your day-to-day life or what you would ideally like to wear, what fits your character and the lore, what type of clothing fits with what, and what kind of hairstyle would complement your outfit. Learning about fashion can help a lot in finding out how to best combine designs, patterns, accessories, and all of that. Think about what kind of fabric your character's clothing would be made of and how that would impact the design. There is a lot of information on fashion out there, and the more you learn, I'm sure that the easier it will make it for you to find out ways to make your character the best version of what it could be. So this was some of the most important things to consider when designing a character in general, but there is some more specific guidelines that might not be as relevant in other types of medium, but are very important to remember when you're making a VTuber specifically. First, when you're a VTuber, the part of you that is going to show the most is your top half. While having an overall unique design and silhouette is important, you shouldn't drag the attention to your legs or other parts of your lower body rather than to your face, since these parts are usually going to be hidden away. The way to drag the viewer's attention to the face is usually, as I mentioned earlier, with more complex design in that place in specific, as well as bigger contrast there and very vibrant colors. While this again isn't a hard and fast rule, if you have an accent color or little accessories you want to add or you want to put more details, try to put all those as close to the face as possible. And considering you need the face to be more attention grabbing, the biggest strength in most anime characters are the eyes and how expressive they can be. Not even by necessarily being big, but adding a lot of elements to and around the eyes can be really helpful, especially if they're very animated in the final product. It's a sure way to make people keep their attention on you visually. And as I mentioned, Contrast can be generally very useful in dragging a viewer's attention. If your design is mostly very light, try adding most of your dark elements close to the face, and the opposite. It can be a good idea to keep the values and saturation in the bottom half fairly uniform. Not the same, mind you, just without very heavy contrast. And use high contrast and values and saturation on the top of your character. So, for example, very dark skin with very light hair, or the opposite, is a very great way to grab the viewer's attention. If not the hair, then the eyes should probably do the heavy lifting, and if not the eyes, then certainly some other design element very near or on top of the face. You don't necessarily need to go crazy with this, but just make sure that the contrast can be easily noticed as more in the area around the face. Also, as you may know, many VTubers have their OC marks or various shapes and elements that are tied to who they are. While not necessary, choosing at least one thing like that for you can really help in making you more memorable and also in tying your design together and making it look more neat and cohesive. For example, I use the shape of a heart. As I mentioned during the silhouette test, it's important to make your design stand out. If you have someone who is familiar with the VTuber space, it could be a good idea to ask for their opinion. Is there anyone else you remind them of? Is there anything that could be communicated in a better way? I personally find such feedback to be extremely helpful. Then, apart from that, you should also think of your design as a chibi or a simple plushie. Would you be able to still understand it's your character and be differentiated from everyone else with only the most basic of your elements left? If yes, it means you've done a great job. If not, then don't fret and start thinking of what you could design in a different way. As I mentioned earlier, your marketability is important. You're a VTuber and people might come across you on thumbnails or on pictures from very far away. What your design looks like is just as important, if not more, than the tags you're using. It's going to tell who the person that sees you, who you are, and it's best you communicate that correctly. While contrasting personality and design can work, as I said, it really can also deter many potential audience members and even draw the wrong audience. I'm not saying that if you have your mindset on a design that you really love but doesn't traditionally fit your personality or content, you can't make it work. Just make sure to find a way to use elements that will communicate to others who you are. Final advice: do not overdo it. Please, this is a general problem with OC designs and it can also be seen in VTubers. You can't add everything on one single design. Or well, you can, but it's probably not a good idea. Our minds can't latch onto a character that has 10 different tropes added onto them. Something very plain wouldn't work either, cause it would be too boring, but chaos might honestly be even worse. I'd say keep it up to 3 things at most. When someone asks you what your VTuber is, you should answer with just 3 words or less. For example, I'm a witch artist, and that's what my design is meant to communicate. Someone might be a gamer cat maid, or a dragon butler, or an eating fox on Esan. Random ideas, by the way. I don't know if these VTubers exist, but you get the point. Now, if for my character I wanted to add even more things that I like, I could be an artist witch that also cooks and loves tea and loves wearing comfy clothes but also high fashion and plays bass and shoes and makes plushies. And these are all things that have to do with me, but they're not really as relevant to what I do as a VTuber. Even if you're a variety streamer with tons of activities, you don't really need to allude to all of them, and if you want to do so, then keep it in very small ways, like little Easter eggs on your design. But keep it at 2 to 3 words that can describe what your character is. 1 word will probably be too basic, and 4 and more will probably be hard to keep track of. Do keep in mind though that this is just general advice. If you already have a design or a vision for one that doesn't follow all of this, that doesn't mean you immediately need to run and change it. After all, what these rules tell us is that most people will like, but it is also important that you yourself like your design. So use this as useful suggestions when making a model, but don't let them hinder your creativity. We all work in different ways after all. So, after having said all that, I would like to show you how I used those rules to make my brand new design. And let's start by looking at some of my older designs to see what I can make better, what I can keep, and what to change. So, when did this whole tiny witch thing start? Back when I first started doing digital art, before I posted anything online, I was searching for a pseudonym or an alias to use when I felt ready to start sharing my creations. I passed through quite a few names, some better, some worse, and at some point, when brainstorming, I got this idea of a witch, but instead of a broomstick, she is riding a stylus. I've always loved fantasy and magic since I was very small, so I felt like this type of design really suited who I am. So I created my logo, which I suppose in a way was the very first form of the tiny witch. So the first iteration of the tiny witch as a character design might have been this silly little pixel art I have here. It is very small, very cute, and honestly in this pixel art form I really like her. Since it's pixel art, the lack of detail kind of works in her favor, and I'm actually very happy with her, but this is what my first actual illustration of the character looked like. So yeah, I honestly don't think I could have made a more basic witch design. And I would analyze what is wrong about this, but it's just quite simple. And you can see that too. This character design is just way too generic. So I first made the logo, as I said earlier, and then I turned it into pixel art. And both of those mediums work better with simpler designs. So I did nothing wrong there, but once the character starts appearing in illustrations and such, this simpleness shows too much. I just gave her a puffy dress with some frills because I've always loved puffy dresses with frills and because I felt it was fitting for a witch, and I also gave her a kind of normal size witch hat, and the clothes I chose are pretty much the two first colors that came to my mind whenever I thought witch. They are definitely not bad colors to match together, but I only use those two colors straight up with no variation or patterns or accessories, and that's how you make a design, a very boring design. If you want your character to stand out, you definitely need to add way more than that. So let's see what I did after 2 more years. Well, I learned a lot more about both illustration and character design. Now we're getting somewhere. Well, far from perfect, this design still is a huge step up above from the previous one. Let's look at it bit by bit. I first decided to do this redesign of my character because this idea of a cool and pretty coat came to my mind and I thought it would look awesome. So I'd say the main draw here was the coat, which I think looks pretty damn good in this design, though I didn't get it quite as good in my actual model. My biggest gripe is probably the pattern. Having a pattern all over isn't a bad thing, but it can drag away attention from the face if it's too high contrast. So I'd probably make the light parts of the pattern darker, especially on the top, and maybe even a little bit on the bottom part of the dress, so that they almost look like textured velvet instead of printed on pattern. And I don't think it's quite enough to stand out on its own, so I probably would have made the pattern even more of a background feature, as I said, and maybe added some buttons or chains or other elements to make the design more interesting. Keeping it lower contrast on the bottom dress and maybe giving some gold accessories on the top flaps to drag more attention to them since they're right under the face. I really like the inside shirt in general. I think it fits the look and does a good job, but I don't really think that this tight fitted and see-through in some parts design is quite me. It's just not the type of clothing that I usually wear, and even though it's more of a fantasy outfit, with my new design I try to keep it to things that sort of mimic what my IRL style looks like as well. I must say, I really like the striped bottom skirt, though it might not be matching the theme quite well, especially since it seems kinda piratey to me. The coat had actually some pirate inspiration at first, so I guess that's why I ended up making this skirt, but that's not necessarily bad. I feel like it fits and the colors are a good choice to not drag attention away from the face or the coat over it. While I really like this chain over here and the movement it can give to the design, I feel like it would be doing a much bigger service to the design if it was above the overcoat, and it was also accompanied by 1 or 2 more chains and hanging a bit differently. And I also probably would make this little heart a bit bigger. The tights match the coat and have a neutral color, which I think is beneficial to the design, and the boots are as simple as they should be, though I'm not sure if the gold was a good choice. While it ties them in with the rest of the design, it's kind of too eye-catching and actually might be less helpful to the overall appeal. I really love the loose long sleeves, since they are also styled like IRL. Maybe not that exaggerated, but I still like them. And the gold ribbon on the waist and back with the strings in front really fit it. I also wear a lot of chokers, and I love neck jewelry in general, so I definitely had to add something there as well. And the little hair clip shows that I'm an artist with the pen and paintbrush on it. My hat is fairly small compared to my current taste, but still not too small, and the sheer decorations on it along with the bell definitely make it stand out from other witch hats, at least a little bit. The hair has a unique shape which makes the design stand out, but I don't think they lend themselves to the medium of animation that well. This could work well as a design for a static medium like a light novel or a manga, but I just don't think they would be that nice to animate. Or maybe it was just my inexperience in rigging that caused me the difficulties I came across in the end. Lastly, the red in the eyes isn't bad, but I only used it because this is what I had in mind for my character at first, and I know that a color like yellow or purple would match way more. Now I'd say I had a few failures translating the design from character sheet to VTuber model, but we're here to talk about the core design today and not about model illustration. That's gonna be in the next video. Overall, I'd say this design isn't trash, but it could use some fixing. It's a middle level of complexity, so I think it could use some more accessories to make it more recognizable. The patterns are a bit much, and I think they could be less noticeable, and I also think it could use some more things that would add movement or some design changes that could make movement look prettier on them. And most important of all, this is definitely a witch, but if you don't notice that little hair clip, this is just a witch. There's nothing really that would tell you this is an artist witch if she's not holding her pen. I definitely wanted to incorporate some more things that would communicate the fact that I'm an artist as well. Now, after seeing what went right and what went wrong with my old design, it's time that we see what I did different this time. And well, let's start with the first step, that is the mood board. First thing that you can do is make a list of things to do with your VTuber. Items, inspirations, abilities, hobbies, vibes, and anything else really that you can think of, so that you make your search for inspiration easier. So let's see. For me that would be witch, artist, tiny, cute. I want my main colors to be pink and black, so since those are my two favorite colors, so pink, black, pretty, gentle, elegant. I don't know if I'm actually into those things, but that's what I want my design to show. So I like Lolita a lot, some gothic inspiration maybe, and also maybe some Jiraiya fashion as well. Now, when making my mood board, I used a lot of pictures. It was quite general, and I picked and I chose various things. But if you want to give your artist a mood board, you should definitely go with something much more aimed. You can start with lots of ideas and start narrowing it down on your own to make the artist's job easier. If you are the artist, just use whatever workflow suits you more, since it's just to help yourself. So what I used was a lot of photography, as well as anime illustrations that I have saved in my PC for inspiration, specifically for using mood boards actually. For photography, I follow a lot of Twitter accounts that make some amazing photos, and I usually bookmark what I like, and I'll dedicate an hour or two of my life every now and then to download all of them. There are also a lot of great fashion accounts as well on Twitter, so you can search for those as well. My illustration collection comes from mostly Twitter and Pixiv, and I have a lot of things that can get my creative juices going there. For fashion specifically, you can also look through photography from magazines or from catwalks or on fashion blogs online, apart from social media. I personally also gather a lot of VTuber designs. I really like to look how they did various things and take inspiration from both their fashion, but also the posing and how certain things were drawn. And another last thing I did, which I kind of started it out for fun, but I don't know, it might actually help. I went to Picrio and tried making various versions of what I wanted my character to look like. Since designs on Picrio are limited to certain things, you might actually end up getting a few different ideas that you could use later. So this is my final mood board. It's big, I know. Yours doesn't have to be this big, and as I said, if you're not the one doing the art, the more concentrated everything is, the better. So try not to keep it too complex in that case. But that's pretty much what I do when it comes to mood boards. So let's go ahead and actually start doing some designing. So, while I could just use my mood board to go ahead and start making my final design, I wanted to try and go at it with more of an open mind. I saw this as an example in the series Ross Draws made on a character design, where you make a few different designs for your character with different concepts, and in the end you decide which parts you want to keep from each one. So, I decided to go with 6 different ideas because I had a lot of different things I wanted to try. But I'd say that even just 3 would be very helpful. This doesn't mean you can't go and make your VTuber immediately if you have a very clear vision that you like, but through this creative process, a lot of interesting elements might come out. So, now I'll tell you a bit about my thought process with each one of the different designs. They all had kind of a shared color palette, which, spoiler alert, it changes later. But let's go. For the first design, it's quite similar to my old one in some ways. The many frills, the flaps on top of the dress, and the long sleeves and boots are all there, but I added a lot of ribbons in many places, which I think can look very nice when animated, and I placed the hat in the way that it's on the back of my head and you can see all of the underside of it, which is meant to have a layer of lace and a cut on the side in the shape of a heart with a metallic border. The hair is also a lot more voluminous and the skirt is very puffy, but not just a round silhouette like the old one. It's very layered, so it looks more interesting. Next I tried something more modern. I gave myself a big oversized jacket, a pleated skirt, lots of fishnet elements, some metallic heart-shaped zippers, still some ribbons to keep the girly vibes, and a smaller hat this time. And while the hair is separated in two big curly volumes on the back, it has a very more street fashion oriented look. For the third one, I went with a bigger hat once more, with a shape more similar to the hat from my original model. This one has way too many frills and pink and ribbons, and it was meant to be extremely cutesy, even more than the first one. But I also kept quite a few darker elements that I liked, like all these smaller metallic parts. The fourth one is probably the most unique out of all of them. It has a more sleek silhouette than the second one, and the shirt with the shoes are both inspired from athlete wear, even though those couldn't be further from my general style. But I still really like this style, especially with the more edgy look the added spikes and metallic elements give it, while the hair is also very sleek and well shaped. For the fourth one, I really want to try doing some asymmetrical sleeves, and I was quite inspired from high fashion, so I tried playing with textures of the fabrics and their colors, and it is meant to feature a lot of lace and different elements, and I also really like the one small ponytail on the side of the hair. And finally, we have the sixth design, where I tried to kind of do a mix from my experience of designing all the other ones, and I kind of put different elements that came to mind, like the more open shoes and the braids on the front part of the hair. But other than that, it also has a lot of layers and frills, similar to the others, and you might have guessed what the things I definitely wanted to keep in this design were. Layers, frills, metallic parts, and lots of asymmetry. And after all this was what I chose I wanted to keep. Now, not all of those could work together, but I would do my best. And so I began making the first draft of my design. I started by figuring out how I wanted the elements I had chosen to be shown in the final design. So, starting of course with a huge hat, which I was kind of set on from the very start, and to which I added some free fabrics that can wave when I move around, since I like the ones in my original design. And I also added the bell, which I think also made the hat a bit more unique, especially since now I added some more elements to it. For my hair, I want to go something very puffy and very long. I think hair like that in VTubers looks very fun, so I really wanted them in my model as well, and I tried to give them a more interesting silhouette so they don't look boring. In the end, the asymmetrical sleeve had won me over, and I decided to go with something that could also be a nod to what I actually do while working in real life. My one arm has an extremely long sleeve that almost reaches the floor. And while this is a big exaggeration, even in real life I really like to have a very long sleeve, especially in winter, to cover my right hand, while as much as I can, while I still can work in shortcuts, of course. And for the left hand, I added a pretty lacy version of the glove I use when drawing on my tablet. As I said, I really wanted to have more art references, and this was one of them. In general, as I continued, I added a lot of frills and layers, as you can see, but quite a few of those elements are going to be changed as we're working for the line art. So, while I was making the line art, I mostly kept everything the same, but I had this idea for a belt that could feature some buttons that would write some of my most used shortcuts. I thought this was a great feature for the design, and I really liked how it came out. It's also a reference to me doing art as well, as I said. For the character seat I was making, I made sure to show some close-ups from my hair clip, the bell in my hat, my pen by itself, and my hand holding the pen, so it can be easier for me to draw them whenever I want to make illustrations of myself. I think it's really important to add both those kinds of things as well as any patterns you use on your character when you're making someone's character sheet, since it's extremely helpful for any artist wanting to work with this design later on. But honestly, even after finishing the line art, there was still some fixing that needed to be done. And after asking for some precious feedback from my boyfriend, who was very helpful in this whole process, I decided to go on and make a few changes, most notably making my incredibly complicated for no reason socks into simple tights. As I mentioned earlier, you're not supposed to add many complicated elements in the lower parts of your design, so I should have known from earlier, but I just thought it was cute. Well, still, I wanted to keep the asymmetry, so as you'll see later, I added some asymmetrical patterns going up my legs. And then it was time for the palette. I thought I had it down when I was making the first designs. I did not. I made so many changes, and I was so indecisive. I changed so many colors, and in the end, I've made a few different design choices. And well, when looking at them, I think either the teal one or the dull blue one would be best in terms of catching someone's attention, as color combinations and just being a good design in general. I still ended up choosing the orangey one because I feel like the warmer tones and the analogous color scheme fit my personality a lot more. As I said earlier too, you don't have to do what the guidelines tell you necessarily. You can choose what feels right to you, and overall you choose what you prioritize. After that, I finished everything off, made what adjustments I needed, added the colors, thought of some nice patterns to add, and voila! My last step was just making sure I had a good looking character sheet where everything appeared in an organized order and I could use my references easily. A good piece of advice is to not add shading to your character design, since it makes it way easier for artists to color pick correctly and easily. Of course, you can use shading if you want a more aesthetic centered reference sheet, but for mine I wanted to make it mostly to make my life easier whenever I had to draw my character, so I made a lot of different versions and even added everything I would need to easily draw for me whenever I needed it. So overall, I really like how the design came out. I think it's a huge step up from what I had previously made, and I think the time and effort I put into it definitely paid off. And I hope that taking you through this process might have actually helped you in designing your own characters. But now, after all of this, you must be ready to go to the next step of making your very own model, with an illustration and rigging. So, stay tuned, and if you'd like to easily catch part 2 on VTuber illustrations and part 3 on rigging, you can subscribe to the channel and press that little bell over there. I am really thankful that you decided to watch this video, especially until the end, and for supporting my work here. I really hope I can help lots of people out there, but I'm not the only one making tutorials, so you can go and check the Google Docs I made in the description, where I have linked a ton of epic resources that I found really helpful. And I will expand this document even more as I add the later parts in the series, of course. Again, thank you so much for sticking around, and I really hope to see you here next time as well. Bye bye!